I want to thank all of you for being here. And also, if you're new to Zoom calls, just want to help you identify a couple things. First of all, we are recording this call. So if you don't want your camera to be seen, it probably won't be. It just highlights the person who's speaking, but feel free to turn off your camera if you're not comfortable being recorded. Also, I have the power to mute people. So if there's too much background noise, I might turn off your sound. It's not because we don't think you have valuable things to say. It's just to ensure the sound quality of the video. But it's my honor to get us kicked off tonight by introducing Walt Pomeroy. Walt is a 1970 grad from Albion, and he was one of the students who helped to lead and kick off that first Earth Day celebration at Albion. And it's my guess that Walt didn't assume when he started planning that CBS would come or that he'd be on a call 50 years later recounting the events. But he did go on also to a great career in environmental advocacy. Walt was a lobbyist and an educator and ended his career as the regional vice president for the National Audubon Society. So we are so grateful that he's willing to share his time with us. He's now retired and living outside of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I want to thank Walt for being here and just ask you, Walt, like, what was it like that first Earth Day here at Albion?
I'll give you a brief little summary of it. It was a beautiful day, which we were very lucky to have. And there were activities on campus like we had never seen before. All the students, all the classes.
He has a haircut.
All the professors were out on the quad, one place or another. So it was a very active, visible outdoor activity all day.
We're here.
Up 6 months, the whole idea and concept of Earth Day wasn't even publicly discussed until December. Gaylord Nelson, Senator Gaylord Nelson from Wisconsin, came up with the original idea back in September. It was called Environmental Teach-In because there had been a number of educational relating to the Vietnam War. And he saw this as a possibility to capture the concept of a teach-in, pull in a lot of people, focus it toward conservation and the environment. Within a couple of weeks of giving that speech, a fellow walked in his office in Washington, D.C., had asked for 10 minutes and said, I'd like to talk to you about what Earth Day is all about. We might want to organize one at Stanford, where I'm a graduate student. Well, the 10 minutes turned into 2 hours, and at the end of 2 hours, Dennis was hired as of Environmental Teach-In, which was the name of the national organization that Gaylord Nelson created. So things by the end of September were starting to take a little bit of a kind of a national structure. By the middle of October, Dennis had hired a big staff of 10 people to organize Earth Day all across the country, and nobody really knew what it was going to be. They were off and running. They decided that the title Environmental Teach-In was a little bit cumbersome, so they worked with an advertising firm in Washington, in New York, and they were the ones that came up with the concept of Earth Day, and they got a discounted full-page ad in the New York Times that said Earth Day, April 22nd, 1970, and a little bit of information down at the bottom and a clip-out coupon. People could send in their name and address, no email or anything else at that point. And envelopes came in by the thousands. So they were all with a list. In terms of Albion and our organizational activities, they all started in the middle of February when 4 of us drove over to Kalamazoo College on March February 12th to hear Congressman Morris Udall. Very few of us had ever heard of him, congressman from Southern Arizona. I had heard of him because I was a member of a number of national conservation organizations and read about him in the magazines. And he gave a wonderful stem-winding 1-hour speech on the crisis of the environment. And he ended it with the last 15 minutes of let's be positive about this crisis. And he talked about Earth Day and what it could be where anybody was from. And he said, if you really want to get involved, join me in the room across the hall at the end and we'll sit and talk there as long as anybody wants to. So the 4 of us from Albion and about 20 or so others went across the hall and we spent an additional 2 hours with him till almost midnight talking about what the concept of Earth Day was and how it could be organized. And we all thought it was a great idea. So driving back in Albion at about midnight on Interstate 94, we organized and started the concept of Earth Day at Albion. Came up with the name, Save Environment Through Ecology, C-S-E-E, as the group name, and decided we needed a small office to work out of, and that we would organize as many events as people wanted to help us organize. So we were off and running by the middle of February in terms of the idea. It took a couple of weeks to get the word out, get permission from campus leaders to do what we wanted to do. So about March 1st is really when it all started. Earth Day was 7 weeks later, and we were starting with a blank tablet, so to speak. You have to keep in mind that at this time, in 1970, there were no cell phones, no fax machines. The only cameras, if anybody had any, were small little film cameras, nothing more than that. No internet, of course, which meant no email, no Google, no Facebook, Twitter, or Zoom, or other social media communications. It was all done by word of mouth, by printed little flyers that we could type up and put onto the mimeograph machine on campus, and by a telephone, a dial telephone. There might have been a few push button phones by then. And if anything was long distance on the phone to talk to anybody else, we paid recall. So a very different kind of organizing structure for all of us. Our organizing committee, about maybe 8 or 10 students to about 20, and others came up with ideas, and we just said, that sounds great. Go with it, just keep us informed on what you want to do. Early on in our organizing structure, we decided that each evening we needed a panel discussion that anybody could come to. So we chose the Science Center, large auditorium, and we filled that room every night, Monday through Thursday. People were sitting in the aisles, they were standing up at the back. There was not one empty seat. And we brought in 3 or 4 different experts that we could contact from around Southern Michigan. Most of them were professors, some educators at the lower than college level. And we really got it kicked off and going with some great conversations and discussions. And then during the day, we all spread out and kind of did our own organized small thing. About 10 days before all that happened is when CBS News contacted us. We happened to be having a little organizing staff meeting at the time. Phone rang, I happened to be sitting closest to it, so I picked it up. And the voice at the other end of the phone said, "Hello, my name is Joan Snyder, and I'm a producer for CBS Evening News."
This is
I paused
about
for a second,
his birthday, 50
and I
years.
almost said as a joke, "Yes, and my uncle is Richard Nixon." But fortunately, I was smart enough to kind of hold my tongue. And then she went on to say that, yes, she was a producer for CBS Evening News for different news events, and that they had decided they wanted to organize a 1-hour special on Earth Day, the night of Earth Day. That had never been done before by any of the other 3 television networks that existed at that time, ABC, NBC, CBS. They had never pulled something off the same day where events occurred all across the country, because they didn't have cable, they didn't have any way to, they didn't have any video. It was all 16 millimeter. So she said, we're gonna have to send a crew out 3-4 days ahead of time of Earth Day, and we're gonna ask you to stage a few events ahead of time so we can fly the film and the crew into Chicago, so the film can be edited, developed, and then sent on to New York, where the whole thing is gonna be put together. I talked to Joan about a week after the show was done, and she said it was a mad scramble, not only in Chicago, but even in New York when they were pulling this whole thing together. But that's how that 1-hour special happened. We were about 3.5 minutes, and we were the recommended small college campus for the program from the environmental teaching group in Washington, D.C. So that's how we got called and selected. And it was a lot of fun. Never done it before, and we organized, you know, kind of some fun activities that were very visual, cleaning up the river, stomping down and flattening all the cans we'd collected so they could be recycled, and on it went from there. And the video, I guess, is being shown many, many times on campus, even today. Earth Day itself, as I said, was a beautiful day. We were outside. We had an outdoor concert the next day on the steps of Kresge. Seminars going on all day. And elsewhere across the country that same day, and of course we had no sense of this at the time, it took stories later, to learn that there were teach-ins and Earth Day activities on 2,000 college campuses on the same day, and in at least 2,000 additional communities, 10,000 elementary through high school events at the school level, and across the country, the estimate was 20 million people, which was maybe 8% of the population of the country. Nothing had ever been done like that before to involve that many people. So, you know, it was a big event. It involved and organized a lot of people. But, you know, you talk about it today, you look at the stuff that's on television right now, reviewing Earth Day, and there's nothing about what happened the first day. It's all forgotten. They talk about the pretty cute animals that are alive today that have been saved, and some public parks and public lands that have been saved. But all the rest of all this organizing has kind of been gone by the wayside. But it was there. It organized a lot of folks. It was amazing to participate in. And I have to say that I missed my environmental history class with Wes Dick for a couple of weeks there leading up to Earth Day, but he was very kind. So there you are, Hannah. There's a brief summary.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Walt, for sharing. It's great to hear all of it. And to, I don't know, I want to point out, this is our most attended web series event. We had over 100 people register. There's 76 different computers on this call. And like you said, it's not something that's celebrated everywhere, but I'm glad that it's a part of our tradition and narrative here at Albion. So, Walt, thank you so much for being willing to share and for the impact and catalyst that this event was for our campus. So I'm going to transition us to someone else who was around for the first Earth Day and who has been teaching environmental history here for all 50 Earth Days. And as many of you know, that's Professor Wes Dick. And Wes is on the call with us with the Lorax. Happy to see. And Wes is letting me share some of his reflections that he wrote about Earth Day previously. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can follow along with me. But I thought it was poignant that he shared that to appreciate the first Earth Day fully, one needs to be reminded that the idea came out of the 1960s, that exciting, dramatic, and turbulent decade. The civil rights movement ushered in the decade and was still front and center in 1970. America formally entered the Vietnam War in 1965. Black student issues, Vietnam War student issues, campaign GM, and campus student life issues, including hair, were bumping up against each other when the news broke that 4 students were dead in Ohio. During a campus anti-Vietnam War protest, the Ohio National Guard shot 13 Kent State students, killing 4, which many of you remember or remember learning that graduation ceremonies were canceled in that time. Somewhat familiar feeling for us right now in higher education. To sum up, the turbulence of the 1960s was still spilling over at the time of the first Earth Day. Earth Day 50 in 2020, of course, has gotten caught up in the turbulence of the virus crisis. Colleges have sent their students home and courses are being conducted via the internet, which had not yet been born in 1970. So here's a picture of Wes with the Lorax and its many tellings on Earth Day. He also shared about the environmental history class. I was also connected to the first Earth Day through the introduction of my first class on environmental history. The excitement and the buzz and the build-up for Earth Day had begun in the fall of 1969 and the time to consider the classes for the spring semester in 1970. I proposed History of Conservation in America and was teaching the class ahead of Earth Day itself. There was a sense that the planet was in peril and that urgent action was needed to combat pollution. The environment was a worthy cause. Soon after, I changed the name of the class to Environmental History. 50 years later, I'm still teaching environmental history. And this picture is of Wes and the 2008 environmental history class with commencement speaker and environmentalist Bill McKibben. They planted a tree down by the Kalamazoo River. Wes also highlighted a couple of other notable Earth Days in Albion history. In 1986, Gaylord Nelson, who was previously mentioned by Walt as kind of the founding teach-in leader of Earth Day, was our keynote speaker here at Albion for Earth Day. In 1990, I loved how Wes worded this, so I'll read this one too. But conventional wisdom said, you can't get someone as famous as David Brower to come to Albion for Earth Day. We phoned him, and to our joyous surprise, he agreed to come to Albion. Brower's keynote speech was entitled The Lessons and Legacies of the Environmental Movement. A documentary entitled For Earth's Sake, The Life and Times of David Brower premiered on PBS while Brower was on campus. Albion College faculty and students gathered with Brower to watch the film at the International House. Washington Gardner Open School and third graders came to campus to watch a film screening with David Brower of the Lorax at the Albion College Library. From there, the elementary school students joined college students and faculty to dedicate a red maple tree outside of North Hall. It is just now in April 2020, beginning to leaf out. So this was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day. For the 30th anniversary of Earth Day, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Was the keynote speaker on campus, another leading environmental leader. And some of Wes's final reflections are on Earth Day 1970, we thought the planet was in peril. In 1990 and 2000, we believed the planet was in peril. On Earth Day 2020, there is no question that the planet is in peril. Environmental teach-ins and environmental action are needed now more than ever. The fate of the Earth is in our hands. My journey has integrated the civil rights, the peace, and the environmental movements. Justice, racial justice, environmental justice, and peace are needed work as we move toward resolving the environmental crisis. Our goal, peace on and with the Earth. So thank you so much to Wes for sharing those reflections, but also for the leadership you have given this campus in environmental justice issues and racial justice issues, and also leadership that you have in this Albion community. So Wes, is there anything that you want to add to the parts that I shared of your reflections?
I would just add that Earth Day 1970, the first Earth Day, was a life-changing event. It changed my life, it changed Walt's life, it changed many people's lives. And in Earth Day 2020, we're challenged by the virus crisis. And it's obviously a tragedy and an obstacle, but it's also an opportunity while we're on pause to contemplate, to meditate what we really value, and to consider that life is out of balance on planet Earth, and we need to change our way of living. And so this is an opportunity such as it is in 2020.
Thank you so much. Those are encouraging and true words. So we are going to transition to another great environmental leader here at Albion. Dr. Doug White is the current Center for Sustainability and the Environment Director here at Albion. He's been at Albion since 1994, which he's pointed out is comparatively small to Westic, but to most of us, this is still a very sizable amount of leadership. So I want to thank Doug for his leadership in planning a whole year of events around Earth Day 50, and would love to hear from you, Doug, what this day holds in significance as the director of CSE.
Earth Day made the Earth better for me. There were huge environmental gains in clean air, clean water, species preservation, and I'm reminded of the political power of Earth Day, and that environmental gains are inherently provisional gains. And many of these gains from 50 years ago are currently being eroded, and I'm sort of lamenting the opportunity of the 50th anniversary campaigns that we might have had to bring the issue to greater attention. And I hope when things open up again, whenever, that I can complete the sort of agenda that we had planned for the spring.
Yeah, Doug, for those of us who might not know, could you tell us a little bit about the impact of the events that you had planned, and also of the gift that Dr. R. Bruce Harper and Jane, his wife Jane's gift, had in supporting the CSE events for this 50th anniversary of Earth Day?
Yeah, so the Bruce Harper, a generous alumnus of the college, wanted to increase the environmental profile of Albion, and he communicated with institutional advancement, and I was tapped to sort of come, how would we spend some money if the Harpers gave us some money? And I saw the 50th anniversary of Earth Day coming, and I knew Albion's history, and that we had made big celebrations or recognition of earlier anniversaries. And so I suggested that as one of the major uses as to his gift. And the second priority was one that I had already uncovered by asking my students earlier that semester what would they like to see. And they wanted to see more water bottle refilling stations on campus. And the Harpers are very much aggrieved by the plastic pollution problem, and so they were very receptive to this idea to eliminate plastic water bottles and to build out the water bottle refilling stations on campus. So those were the main uses that we're putting the Harper gift to. And we had March 11th, we had our keynote speaker come in, and that was the exact day that the gathering restrictions fell down in Michigan. We were prepared to host 1,000 people to see Hank Green. People were coming from out of state, from across the state, and suddenly I had to close the doors and bar outsiders, and only 85 select students were able to hear Hank Green's talk. And then the rest of the events, including events that we had planned for this very day, are all on hold. And in the fall, or whenever, we'll return to that agenda.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you for all of the events that have already happened, and for all of the ones that you're working on postponing. I've been really encouraged this week reaching out to you and others and hearing, the COVID-19 can delay us, but Earth Day is not canceled here at Albion, even if it has to be postponed. So another part of what CSU is doing in this time, Doug actually offered an extra credit assignment for students to create placards for the most used water bottle refilling stations on campus. And we actually get to vote on them tonight. So in the chat, I have a link, and if you copy and paste it into a separate window, you can rank each of the students' placard ideas on a scale of 1 to 5. And the winner will be posted on campus. So I think it's a fun way that we can be involved tonight. And as you pull that up, I will go ahead and share also just a couple of pictures and images of other things that have happened on campus this year through CSE. As an advanced celebration, they did a half Earth Day this year in the fall, where there was trash pickup and protests outside of the science building. And also, this is a beautiful art piece that was created in the atrium of the Science Center out of plastic water bottles. And below I included this fact that just the highest used water bottle refilling station has saved over 149,013 water bottles, which I think is beautiful when you look at that piece of art and how many water bottles these stations are working they really are working to reduce our footprint as a college. So I'm really grateful for the work that Doug and students, there's so many students on this call too, which is great. So thank you for all the work that you've put in and are continuing to put in. And I love that this sign that Doug is holding says Earth Day every day, because I think we've really had the opportunity to live that out based on the delay of things this year. So the last person that we are highlighting tonight is Jason Raddatz, who's live at the Nature Center right now and is going to share a little bit about how can you get out, even in our unusual circumstances, and celebrate Earth Day outside this year. So, Jason, I think you're muted. Do you need, I'll unmute you.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Outstanding. Hey. So I'm out here with my junior nature.
I'm cold, Daddy.
Yes. But proving the old German adage that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing. And I think Abby has just pointed out that it's pretty chilly out here at the Nature Center.
So
But
I just have to put on my sweatshirt.
there you go. So I'm out here on the white pines that were planted in 1972 Earth Day, walking up ecology. And what is interesting about this section of, oh my gosh, about this section of ecology is that we sort of have Earth Day past and Earth Day future going on. And behind me, you can see the invasive vines, the bittersweet that is really prevalent, especially along this trail. And as our climate changes, invasive species like this are going to be prevalent in our ecology. And one of the things that we do, that you can do during this COVID time, is to think about the bigger ecosystem that we belong to. When today at Raddatz house, so that we went through our yard and we looked at all of the plants that we had, and we asked, hey, is this a native species or is this not a native species? And we're kind of fortunate because my wife is a really good gardener, and and that's right. And most of our plants are native species, so it helps increase the biodiversity. We are, when we talk about Earth Day and sustainability and the environment, we talk about the next mass extinction, which is going on. We have a huge decrease in insect populations that's occurring. That is being felt with our birds. There's that wonderful research paper that came out a couple months back that stated that 30% of all populations of birds are declining. So as this moves up the food web, our sustainability comes into question. So what we have to do as the top end of the food web is think about what are we doing to encourage sustainability at home. And if it's it can be something as recycling. Most communities have recycling opportunities. Unfortunately, our city recycler shut down this year, but larger communities have that opportunity for recycling. It could be shopping locally, going to the farmer's market and helping out small farms. I used to tell, back in the day when I was a kid, we had, when I ate a burger, it was made up of about 7 different cows. And today it's made up of about 10,000 different cows, because the meat packing places, and anyway, I can talk about this for hours. Our processors are down to about 7 to 10 major processors. And the Smithfield plant that closed down in South Dakota last week has a major effect on the pork production, on the pork products that are available to us. So, so what we can do is support the small guy, increase the diversity of our ecosystem. And diversity is what keeps our ecosystem strong, because if we don't have a strong ecosystem, this is what we end up with. And we don't want that. Anything else, Hannah? I'm sorry.
You're good. Could you maybe zoom in on one of the vines just to?
I'm going to walk right up to one. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm going to switch. I'm going to see if I can get my camera.
Cool. I think it was kind of hard to see, but thanks,
Okay.
Jason, for sharing those ways that we can reduce our footprint. They're huge vines. I
Oh, yeah,
hadn't noticed the vines until Jason mentioned them to me last week, and I've been in the nature center every day, and then all of a sudden I saw them everywhere. Yeah. So yeah, one thing that Jason and I were talking about earlier this week too was just going outside makes you think about the role that you play in the ecosystem. And so I hope that you have a nature center near you where you can get outside this week, reflect on that. And our last piece of celebration tonight is actually a musical composition by Ryan Powell, class of 2019. And what I love about his composition, it uses noises from the Nature Center, and it's just so reflective and peaceful. And Ryan is great, and he shared it to us before it's complete so that we can celebrate it with it today. So we have about 2 minutes of what will be a 5-minute piece. But before we listen to that, to end our scheduled programming, I have a few big announcements. One is that we are, as the pace of life adjusts right now and the pace of the college continues to adjust, we're also going to adjust the pace of the web series. So for right now, we're going to start going to every other week with the hopes that we can continue to make great content. And in 2 weeks, May 6th, we are going to be doing a highlight of commencements past with highlights of speakers, speeches, and traditions that have changed. So Elizabeth Palmer, class of 2010, and the archivist will be back, and she will be bringing co-director of the library, Michael Van Houten, with her, and they're going to be sharing some great tidbits, both good and bad. There are going to be some bloopers, which I can really appreciate. So in order to celebrate our gradiversaries as alumni of our institutions, as well as to celebrate the current graduating class, we will be doing that on May 6th. And then the second and probably more important announcement is that tomorrow, I would like to personally invite you at 11 a.m. We will be announcing the 17th president of Albion College. So as many of you know, Dr. Ditzler announced his retirement in the fall, and the Presidential Search Committee has been working hard ever since to find a great next leader for us. And from what I've heard, the next leader will be someone who is excited to move in the direction and momentum of the past 6 years. So be on the lookout around 11 a.m. Eastern time for an email from Michael Harrington, who is the head of the Presidential Search Committee, the chair. And that email will give you a live link right as the news release comes out tomorrow. And join us in sharing that with your friends and celebrating. We would love to see excitement around our alumni base about our next president. So with that, the only other thing I have to say is that if you want to stay on after the musical composition, Walt and I'm sure others have agreed to stay on. And if you have questions or if you want to share a memory from Earth Day, we would love to keep talking. But if you are going to drop off after our scheduled programming, thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you in 2 weeks. So without further ado,
Anna?
yes?
Anna? I just have two quick closing comments for everybody.
Oh, please, go ahead.
First, I'm sorry that I neglected to say thank you to many of the Earth Day organizers from 1970 who are on this call.
Oh, please do.
I recognize a number of names. Faces are a little different 50 years later. Recognize the names, so thank you to all of you. And my closing question to all of you, and then I'll give you the answer, is think about what event happened about 2 weeks before Earth Day, that if it had happened, Earth Day most likely would not have occurred. After all the organizing across the country and everything else. And the answer to that, and I never get the correct answer when I'm out speaking and talking about Earth Day, the answer is Apollo 13. If Apollo 13 had turned out to be a disaster, our country would have been in a real funk, and I don't think much of Earth Day would have occurred, certainly nothing like what did occur. So that's kind of an interesting perspective as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and thank you for the reminder to thank all of you. Thank you to Professor Westick, to Walt, to Jason, to Dr. Doug White. We're so grateful and honored to be able to celebrate Earth Day with you, even if it has to be virtually this year. And thank you to Ryan as we start to share your piece. Oh, 1 second. Sure. Sorry, you have to see my screen. Great. Well, thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a peaceful rest of your Earth Day, and that you continue your celebration from here. Have a great week. And I'm going to stop the recording now.